my name is Damian Vargas, and welcome to my podcast. Yeah, I know, crazy setup. Welcome. Today, I'll be talking about nudging, more specifically in regards to water policy implementation. To begin, nudging was a term coined by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. Richard is currently a scholar at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, and Cass is a professor at the Harvard Law School. Both have coined the term as a choice architecture that alters behavior in a predictable way without forbidding options or significantly changing economic incentive. Now, what I plan to do in regards to this is hopefully it goes better than my in-person presentation, as you guys saw. I do plan to go a little bit more lax at this one. So I hope you enjoy. So I won't lie, it's kind of a little dense. I'll try to keep it relatively fresh. I'll try my best at least. So as we know, every year Arizona water utility companies send report to their customers. A million of them receive about a 13-month report of their water usage as part of the Water Smart program. The Water Smart program is a program that has kept Arizona's water use relatively stable since the 1950s. So, if that is the case, why are we watching the Colorado River shrink? Why are states negotiating so low? Why are states negotiating emergency water cuts? And why does the issue keep deepening even though the letters keep going out? That's what I plan to argue today. Not whether behavioral nudges work, because evidence has shown that they do, but that working on the problem isn't the same as solving it. That's because there's a gap between what these programs aim to achieve and what the problem, and what the problem actually requires. And that gap isn't accidental, it's structural. It's built into the logic of nudge economics itself. To understand the gap, we have to go back to where the theory started. In 2004, Thaler published Save Me Tomorrow, where he does something unusual for an economist. He admits to what he's doing. He pleads guilty to paternalism and admits that we are steering you, but that you always have the option to opt out. That non-objectionable logic is what allowed the practice to travel from retirement savings to health, energy, and water policy. It became the infrastructure policy implementation itself. Ferraro and Price decided to test that logic directly on water usage and collected data from 100,000 households from Georgia. They used 3 interventions. The first was a weak norm of technical information about usage. The second was upping the ante by using moral appeal. And the third, however, was a strong norm of social comparison. By telling someone they used more water than 73% of their neighbors, the results showed that social comparison won. It seems that telling someone their neighbors are doing better makes them want to come back. Well, makes sense, right? You don't want to seem like a bum, right? Thaler would call that libertarian paternalism itself. Nobody was forced. Everyone could opt out. The choice architecture just made conservation the path of least resistance. Our argument comes from Gane, who tends to argue with a little bit more precise and uncomfortable point of view at first. And the reason why is because he argues that nudge economics is a political project disguised as a technical one. And the reason why it's disguised so well is because it lives in what the framework doesn't ask. It doesn't ask who designed the choice architecture. It doesn't ask why it's being asked at this level rather than that one. And this is shown in Ferraro's study, which was conducted in Cobb County, Georgia, a county that the paper flags that is not known for environmentalism. Yet, conservative households responded to social comparison anyway. The researchers framed this as proof that the nudge transcends politics. Gane would argue, though, that that's exactly the wrong conclusion. A nudge doesn't transcend politics, it bypasses it. It gets conservative households to cut water use without connecting the water to the Colorado River, without asking who owns the water rights. The political question never enters a room, showing that it's not a feature, it's a mechanism. And when the data And the data, when read carefully, shows exactly that. As previously stated, Ferraro and Price tested these three interventions across 100,000 households. The first was the technical information of how to read your meter, or water meter, local conservation resources, and drought conditions. The assumption being that people didn't know the water waste that they're using. Yet, statistically, it showed that technical information reduced usage by 1%, proving that knowledge alone does almost nothing. The second was a weak social norm, the same technical information, but a moral appeal was added on. Conservation was framed as a community effort and explanation of why it matters to the particular region. Results improved, but not meaningfully, showing that the idea of caring for said political idea is too abstract enough to change behavior. The third was a strong social norm of setting up percentiles and setting households their water usage and comparing them to their neighbors. It was no lecture, but more of a reflection to the household itself, saying this is your water usage and it is 73% more than your local neighbors. With that, nearly 5% of the community reduced their water usage, equivalent to a 12 or 15% increase in water price itself. The mechanism isn't guilt, but status. Nobody wants to be the outlier. Bernedo, Ferraro, and Price came back 6 years later and found that the effect still persisted and was detectable, but declined by half. A single letter itself reshaped behavior for 6 years. That is an enormously powerful tool, which makes the question more urgent. Why is that power being used here, and not somewhere else in the system where the actual drivers of scarcity live? In Arizona terms, we can question or point that finger towards the agricultural system, since they use about 71%, or somewhere in their 70s, or somewhere in the 70% of Arizona's water usage. And this is where Damon Centola, How to Make Big Things Happen, is where I'd argue is one of the most important challenges to nug economics, though Centola never makes the argument himself. His central claim is that we've been thinking about how change is spread in a fundamentally wrong way. We assume that it works like a virus. A person catches the information and passes it on, spreading it out through the social network. That model works for simple information or simple contagion. A news story, a funny video, or last night's game. A single exposure is enough to pass it on. Centola calls this, once again, the simple contagion. But behavior is different. When you're asking someone to take a social risk or financial risk, you have to adopt a new norm to change something that they've done for years. And a single exposure isn't enough, hence where the redundancy comes in. Think about how you heard the news story this morning versus how you changed a belief you held for years. We don't adopt new behaviors we heard once in a blue moon. We adopt them when we see multiple people we trust in an overlapping social circle doing the same thing simultaneously. Once again, redundancy. Centola calls this complex contagion, and it requires a completely different network structure to spread. As stated in my in-person presentation, simple contagions are spread through weak ties, or better yet, acquaintances that you barely know in the social worlds. That's how information goes viral. But complex contagions is quite literally the opposite. It requires dense clusters and people who know each other, reinforce each other, and make a norm of the new behavior, making it feel comfortable and unrisk-worthy of adopting the new behavior. Now, a reasonable objection here is if nudges are aimed at the wrong target, why not redesign them? Point them at institutions and nudge corporations instead of households, using the same tool with better aim. Though it is a fair objection, it misunderstands what a nudge is fundamentally. A nudge works by altering the choice environment of an individual privately. The letter goes out to one household, they see the numbers, they privately adjust. Nobody else sees the adjustment, there's no movement of collective visibility, no community, no sense that there is something shifting together. That collective visibility is exactly what makes a norm feel real, or what makes it self-sustaining. Centola's research points to exactly this during Black Lives Matter and Arab Spring, where dense clusters of committed people who reinforced each other are the ones who hit a tipping point and allowed for the behavior to become the new norm. That shows that it is a categorically different tool, and the problem isn't that nudges are aimed at the wrong people. It is that the wrong kind of tool is being used for the kind of change that actually needs to happen. And luckily, Arizona gives us the chance to aim it at the right one. So what does the actual tool look like in practice? Not as an abstraction, but as an actual program. Well, to begin with, I wouldn't state that we start with a comparison of your neighbors as a guilt trip. Rather, we start with informing the constituents of Arizona within the water program, of the said water program, exactly what the goal is of the Colorado River Compact and how many other people that reside in other states depend on said river itself. While doing that, I also kind of want to inform the constituents of culprits within Arizona that, as previously been stated, like agriculture, who uses about 70% of Arizona's water usage. Once again, and sharing this information not as a guilt trip, but as an eye-opening information to inform the public of what our common goal is. As we continue with that is then when Centola's step comes in, you don't send the information that you have collected privately. You actually make a public scoreboard of it using different measurements as some type of positive reinforcement in regards to what we did in regards to water usage, whether it be riparian habitat that has been rehabilitated or the water supply that has been extended. These type of measurements are what I would say build a beneficial community and an identity around environmental conservation rather than what we would see with the effect cutting short after 6 years. It's kind of innately built due to the redundancy of our strong ties. But here's what happens when you design that set program, and kind of similar to what we saw in the research presented in the Georgia study, is that we will begin to see people who question the system, or as it was stated, lower income citizens who begin to question, why is this being targeted at me and not at the correct person? And realistically, I don't think this is kind of some type of idea to poke a bear, but in my opinion, what is a democratic government? It is people that are actually entertained and not entertained, but connected and moving with legislation that actually interests them, making it a politically active society. Here's what I keep coming back to. The tools work, and Ferraro proved it. Bernedo proved it 6 years later, and the behavioral science is not the problem. The problem is the question nobody in literature asks. Why are these tools being aimed here? At the household and at the individual. The person who, in my opinion, is least responsible for the scale of the problem. Centola answers that even if you want to fix it, you couldn't fix it with a better nudge, because that kind of change that needs to happen, the renegotiation of water rights, the reallocation of agricultural consumption, the political decision that a river reaching the sea is worth something, that change doesn't spread through private letters. It spreads through communities that see themselves acting together. Every summer in Arizona, the letters go out, the households adjust, the river keeps shrinking. That's not a failure of behavioral science, but behavioral science working exactly as it's designed, solving the problem that it's aimed at, leaving the bigger problem, untouched. I apologize. The question of who made that choice and whether willing to call it what it is, a political decision dressed in the language of choice. Gane answers that isn't an accident, that nudge economics is a political project, that locates the problem in the irrational individual because locating it in the structure would implicate the structure itself. That's behavioral science working exactly as it's designed, solving the problem it's aimed at and not the bigger problem it's supposed to solve. the question of who made that choice and whether we're willing to call it what it is: a political decision dressed in the language of choice.